Okay, so I guess it's 2 minutes over 6, so we can start. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the IIMA Public Policy Alumni Special Interest Group webinar series. The Alumni Special Interest Groups at IIMA are platforms that bring together alumni, faculty, and students and leverage the collective intellectual resources engaged in specific areas to bear on some of the most challenging issues of our times, and to enable them to collaborate with each other much more intimately and to engage with industry and practitioners in a much more multifaceted manner. The IIMA Public Policy SIG is a group of alumni and faculty of the Institute with expertise and interest in the field of public policy and development. It fosters collaboration among the IIMA community and the wider world of public policy practitioners to contribute to India's inclusive development agenda. The webinar series are an important activity of the alumni special interest groups, which bring the thoughts, views, and expertise of renowned experts to the IIMA community. Recently, some of the most important policy announcements by the government have been about production-linked incentives for various sectors. There have been several initiatives earlier to boost manufacturing, but most of them have focused on facilitating exports, including focus market schemes, focus product schemes, Vishesh Krishi Gramin Udyog Yojana. In the current decade, India has attempted to support exports through merchandise exports incentive schemes. Today's topic of policy conversations on production-linked incentives sheds light on certain aspects of PLIs as much as can be done in a short span of an hour. To share his views on this important topic, we are very happy to welcome Mr. Ishtiyaque Ahmed, advisor NITI Aayog, and a key functionary in contributing to the policy framework around PLIs. In conversation with Mr. Ahmed, we have Professor Saral Mukherjee, Faculty Production and Quantitative Methods area, and Professor Viswanath Pingali, Faculty Economics area at IIMA. To all the participants, please send in your questions in the Q&A section or the chat section. I now hand over the platform to Professor Pingali to take over the proceedings.
Thank you very much, Anurag. A few months ago, Professor Saral Mukherjee and I were chatting about some of the key policy initiatives and how the Indian industry is shaping up. And one thing that came to us immediately was the entire story that's building up about production-linked incentives. And as is what we would do in such cases, we reached out to a couple of our ex-students to get us talk to people who are behind such schemes so that we understand what this is all about. And in that context, I think one of my students actually passed on to me the contact information of Mr. Ahmed. And when I reached out to Mr. Ishtiyaque Ahmed, he was very kind enough to agree to talk to IIM alumni special interest groups about production-linked incentives. Just to introduce Mr. Ahmed, Mr. Ahmed is an Indian Revenue Service officer of 1992 batch. He's worked extensively in the areas of taxation, foreign investment, foreign collaboration, infrastructure development, and mining sector. He has also worked for promotion of international trade and was responsible for the release of Export Preparedness Index, which ranks the states and union territories of India on their readiness to export. Recently, he has been involved in the making of production-linked incentive scheme in some of the key sectors of the economy. He is presently working as an advisor industry in NITI Aayog. Mr. Ahmed, it's very, very nice to have you here. It's our privilege to talk to you today on this very important policy initiative. Since many of the audience may not necessarily be completely clued in on this concept of PLI, production-linked incentives, we thought it might be great if you could talk us through what this scheme is, how it has evolved into the current shape that it is. After which, I think my colleague Saral and I will, we will try to engage you in a conversation around this. But once again, let me start by welcoming you and thanking you at the same time for being a part of this meeting today. Thank you very much. Over to
you. Thank you, sir. And I'm extremely grateful to Professor Viswanath Pingali, and I'm also very grateful to Mr. Saral Mukherjee and Mr. Anurag Chaudhary, and for giving me this opportunity and giving me opportunity to speak to alumni of IIM Ahmedabad, the premier institution of the country. And in fact, I had discussions with our CEO also, Mr. Amitabh Kant. He also was very encouraged about our association with IIM Ahmedabad. So coming straight to the topic which I am assigned and I'm supposed to speak on, it's basically about production-linked incentive scheme. So what I try to do, I try to complete a small presentation, maybe in 15, 20 or 25 minutes of time, trying to prove what country needs and why this scheme of production-linked incentive has been announced by the government and is under implementation. So in the first part, I would like to prove that why exports are very, very important for the country, and for exports, why manufacturing is important for the country. These are the two areas I would like to prove before getting to what should be the prescription to address this. That is how the PLI scheme comes into the picture. So let me start with the presentation. Okay. So as you can see, India is the fifth largest economy in terms of the GDP, and when it comes to the manufacturing output, it is number 6. But if you see the scale of difference, it's a very, very high. China stands at over 4 trillion, and we are at 412 billion. So though we are at number 6, the difference is very, very much. As far as the exports are concerned, we are not faring that very well. We rank 13th. And our share in the export market, it has marginally improved, but it is 2.1% of the global exports. Why it is so? Because our 70% of the exports is going to the traditional areas where actually the global exports constitute just 30%. And where the 70% of the exports lie, we export just 30% of our goods. So if you see the China tops the table, so are the countries like Japan, South Korea, China, Vietnam. They are the examples of the export-led growth. Next. So here, if you see our export box, what I have tried to do is making a comparison of the global products which are being exported in 2001 and how they have fared in 2020. It almost globally it remains the same. While India has all along been concentrated in the traditional items, but it is good to see that in 2020 we are able to get 2 more lines in the top exports, that is the pharmaceuticals, and other is the machinery and machinery parts. But globally, the exports are on electrical machinery, electrical products, parts and machinery parts, with an approximate share of 28%. That level of share we do not have. And this includes the electronics as well. Next slide. This is what I mentioned earlier. China is occupying the top position, and we are at 13. Next. So there are few examples. I had a number of examples, but confining myself to only 2 examples. You see South Korea and China. They are the best examples. There is the case of Vietnam also. I can speak on that. Vietnam is basically not an economy which is making exports out of its natural growth. Their export to GDP ratio is very, very high. While other countries, be it India, be it China, be it Japan, any other country, exports are out of natural economic growth. So I have picked up South Korea and China. If you see that exports and the national income, they travel together. So exports become very, very important for economy to grow, national income to grow. Next one. As far as our exports are concerned, we have been almost in tune with how the world is faring. In 2005, we were exporting $100 billion and world was 10 trillion. In 2013, we were 336 billion, world was 18.7 trillion. And in 2020, we came down to 275 trillion. It is because of largely due to the COVID, and world is 17 trillion. So broadly, we are in sync with what is happening in the global trade in the world. But if we have to be different to grow more. Next. So this is another important aspect. That is how I have explained the importance of the exports, why it is very, very important. And now I try to shift to say how manufacturing is important, because ultimately exports is function of efficient manufacturing. If your manufacturing is not efficient, you will not be able to export. Just because there are concessions, market access, all those things are fine, but you have to be very, very efficient in manufacturing. Now let's see the data. I have captured the data from 1950-51, and the latest of the data we could get of 2016-17. But the point I'm trying to drive is very, very important. As far as agriculture sector is concerned, in terms of GDP, from the share of over 50%, it has come down to around 18%. The industry has gone to 30%, services have gone to 57%, and as far as this manufacturing sector is concerned, it's not grown that much. And why it is so important will come in the next slide. It demonstrates the fact. So agriculture sector in 50-51 was contributing 51.8% to the GDP, and in the employment, its share was 72%. In 17-18, its sectoral share in the GDP has come down to around 16%. Still, it is employing around 44% of the people. It basically cannot employ it, and large number of people employed in the agriculture sector are basically underemployed. You see the industry. Here I left out the manufacturing because we should focus on industry. Industry was contributing 14% to the GDP in 50-51, 10% of the share in the employment, and largely now it is contribute 29% in the GDP, but the employment share is at 24%, 25%. What has replaced the GDP is the services sector. From 33%, it has gone to around 55%. But when it comes to the job creation, it has not contributed that much. Its share in the job creation is just 31%. So this is the how the different three sectors have grown. If you see the agriculture, its share in the GDP has gone down from 51% to around 16%. Manufacturing sector, it hasn't grown that level, and as for the services sector, it has gone from 33% to 54%. So the basic thing is that our manufacturing sector has not grown to the extent it should have grown. That is why we have not been able to create well-paying jobs that was necessary for the labor force, which was coming out of the primary sector. Next slide. So the fact is that we have to have export-led growth. It's not the model of the Vietnam, but the exports should come as part of the natural growth of the economy. And we need to have very, very efficient manufacturing. But even for the efficient manufacturing, you have to see number of factors. And to that, to address that, the government of India has taken number of reforms. So if we say, there is a GST. Now we have a common economic market in the country. Corporate taxation has become very, very competitive. There's an insolvency and bankruptcy code which is in operation. Labor laws have been codified. It has to be implemented. We have a most liberalized FDI policy in the world. If you see around 2004, we were getting probably less than $1 billion. In last year, we got $82 billion at FDI, which is a huge, huge number. I should not be making comparison, but our neighboring countries don't have the foreign reserve of even $20 billion. So in a year, we are getting more than $82 billion of FDI. And this year also, despite being COVID, we are going to have increased FDI. Increased FDI demonstrates that we have the absorption capacity. Our economy is growing. People will invest if your country is able to absorb money and they have their return to the investment. So land acquisition has also been simplified to a certain extent, and there is the ease of doing business. Ease of doing business, initially it was confined to Bombay and Delhi, but India has taken it to the federal level where all the states are ranked. And this is not done solely by the government of India, but also in partnership with the World Bank. So every state is ranked on a number of parameters with regard to the ease of doing business. So significant facilities has been created in respect of global value chains. So to promote exports, we launched the scheme of MEIS that was done, and in March 2020 we started with this PLI scheme. Next. So coming back to how we try to promote exports. This MEIS, Merchandise Export Incentive Scheme, it was launched in the Foreign Trade Policy of 2015, but in some form or other, exports were getting incentivized since 2005 or so. It so happened that in 2019, we lost the case in WTO. USA has challenged, because one of the conditions for incentivizing exports is that you cannot have more than $1,000 per capita income continuously for a period of 3 years. India breached this in 2015. We were taken to WTO dispute in 2017, and 2019 the case was decided against us. So MEIS scheme as such no longer exists. It was in operation till December 2020. But when it was, this was how it was. So it was covering around 85% of the exporters. Its coverage was very, very large. Around 73% of the tariff lines were getting covered. And when it came to the value, it was almost 50%. So as far as the MEIS is concerned, its coverage was very, very large. Maybe in that process, it was losing the impact. Next. So, because MEIS can no longer be continued, there is a money which can be used to incentivize the manufacturing in the country. So, country had to make a choice whether they should be spreading their resources too thinly across the number of beneficiaries and thereby losing the impact, or go for selection of the global champions going for the scale. So a lot of consultations were held. Consultations were held with the industry, with the line ministries. What should be our approach? So it was decided that we should focus on the areas of strength, where we can create global champions. We should focus in the areas which are of future opportunities, areas where there can be large-scale employment generation. And the selection of cases should be limited only so that we can have the impact. So the targeted nature of the scheme is one of the most significant aspects of this scheme, so that we select champions, they bring the anchor units and create the ecosystem of the downstream industry. That is how the entire value chain gets established. So it was meant to ensure efficiency and economies of the scale in the manufacturing sector and key sectors to create and nurture global champions, make Indian companies globally competitive so as to penetrate the global supply chains, and to attract large-scale investments and to achieve larger employment generation. So these were the broad objectives. So these are in fact, there are 13 PLI schemes. So I have divided it into 10 by merging the ministries. So just to, there's a total outlay of around $27 billion. In rupees, it works out to 1,97,291. And the allocation of different schemes is given the screen. So I can go individually to other schemes so as to just demonstrate the rationale. Next. So ACC battery is very, very important. It is, in fact, the opportunity of the 21st century. There's so much of emphasis on the renewable energy. India needs to grab this opportunity. India would require around 1100 gigawatt of advanced batteries to fulfill its domestic demand based on the analysis which we have done. The sector is also important for the complete utilization of renewable energy, including India's ambitious solar energy goal. Total outlay of 18,100 crore has been given for this industry. When it comes to the electronics, electronics is a very, very important industry of the country because it has a lot of value. In fact, this was the first PLI scheme which went on the ground. Today, digital economy of the country is around $200 billion, but most of the imports have been happening in this sector. When we spoke to a number of stakeholders, the companies who were prospective investors, we found out that they have the disability of around 8 to 9%. They said, give us that incentive for a limited period of time. We will shift our shops in this country. That is how we have approached. In the mobile segment, presently the value addition is 15 to 20%. It is likely to go up around 35 to 40%. Similarly, in hardware and laptop also, we have come with the PLI. There, the value addition is still less. We are trying to increase it to around 30%. So in those two areas, we are going to achieve far greater value, which we will be giving in the subsequent slide. As regards the solar PVs, India has the target of achieving around 450 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030. And presently, 80% of these solar PVs are imported from China. So this is an area we need to invest in. We are going to create 10,000 megawatt manufacturing capacity of integrated solar PV manufacturing plants in the country. Textile is one of the very important sectors of the country. It's one of the biggest employers. We have more than 5% of the global share. But again, like typically for the all Indian exports, we operate in the traditional area. We operate in cotton. What has moved to synthetic? So this is the PLI scheme which specifically targets those areas where we do not try to access. That is MMF fabric and technical textile. Word is around this. So we have created incentive scheme for these very areas so that we can capture more of the global market. As far as the technical textile is concerned, we have a whole huge domestic market. But in terms of the MMF and MMF fabric, we can access the global market. That there lies the huge opportunity. So we have around 10,000 crores for the textile sector. Food processing sector. In India, very limited food is processed and there's a lot of wastage. And this industry is a highly localized industry. And it has so much of connect to the tier 2, tier 3 and farmers connect. So this is a very important sector. What we have tried to do is that there should be more and more value addition before we start incentivizing. So we have picked up 4 areas in this food processing sector. It is ready to eat, ready to cook, marine products, fruits and vegetables, and mozzarella cheese. In terms of when it comes to the advanced automobile sectors, automobile sector is very important for the country. In fact, entire ecosystem of the industrial development is around the automobile sector. It is one of the greatest employers in the country, but in the advanced automotives, our share is just 3% against 18% globally. We export less than 2%. And in the automobile sector, what we have chosen is the electric sector and the advanced automotive, not the IC engine, that is the traditional technology, because ultimately the future lies in the electric segment. So those are the sectors which have been chosen, and around 26,000 crore rupees has earmarked for this thing. That also includes around 80 crores for the drones. Then we have this pharma, bulk drugs, and medical devices. You remember in March 2020, when Wuhan crisis came, there was a lot of crisis around APIs because we are dependent on critical APIs on China. So we came out with the scheme where we incentivize these active production of active pharmaceuticals ingredients in the country. And also in terms of the medical devices, we are heavily importing. So these were the two of the schemes which were picked up in the pharmaceutical sector. But overall pharma sector was not addressed, which was addressed later on. Our pharma sector is supplying 14% of the total global drug needs in volume. But when it comes to the value, it is just 3.6%. If we can increase this value to 5%, from 42 billion now, we can go up to 160 billion. And that is a possible. That is how we came with the PLI 3 in the pharmaceutical sector, which identifies those very areas where we can get more and more value and penetrate in global markets. So if our industry is presently at 42 billion only, we can easily in next 7-8 years time, we can easily make it to 150 plus billion economy. Network and telecom and networking products, we are hugely import dependent. We have identified this sector and number of players have already applied in it. So there are white goods and LEDs. Presently, you see the air conditioners. 75% of the components of air conditioners are imported. Compressors and water tube, copper tubes, they are all imported. So we have this scheme which incentivizes production of these very components. LEDs, the market is matured. If we incentivize, we will achieve exports. Specialty steel. Specialty steel, we are net exporters of steel, but when it comes to the specialty alloy steel, we are importers. We want to incentivize that very segment. That is how 6,000 has been earmarked for the specialty steel. So this is how I come to the end of the selection of the sectors are concerned. Now I just list out what are the key highlights of the scheme. The PLI scheme will be typically for a period of 5 to 7 years. It will not be indefinite period. These industries have to come and become competitive in this much of time. And incentive is based only on the performance. It's not the capital subsidy. You perform, you get accounts audited, only then the incentive can be given. High rates of targets have been given so that the production is additional. It is not that the existing production can be claimed for the incentives. So it has to be new production which comes with the additional production. It allows flexibility if because 13 sectors have been chosen, some of the sectors may not perform, some of the players may not perform. So there's a flexibility of shifting money from one sector to another sectors. And it focuses on larger players. It focuses on scale over the spread. It aims to build manufacturing units with capabilities to cater both in export markets and domestic markets. Targets high domestic value addition. In fact, steel, we want full integrated in units. In food processing sector, we want a complete ecosystem in the country. For ACC battery, we mandate 60%. So in sector after sector, we are trying to achieve maximum value addition in the country rather than imported item being assembled in the country. It doesn't distinguish between domestic players and the foreign players. And most importantly, we are giving incentive on average rate of 5%, and we have a total outlay of around $27 billion. If we translate into the manufacturing output, we are going to achieve additional manufacturing output of around $500 billion during the currency of this scheme. So I appear to be running out of time, but I give one example. I can skip this slide, get to the last slide get to the next slide. So this is one scheme which is under implementation. So that is the PLI scheme of large scale electronic manufacturing, that is mobile sector. There, during the scheme, there is a production of $40 billion. Out of that, 60% will be exported, that is $86 billion. Investment is 11,000 crores. Value addition is going to increase from existing level of 15 to 20% to 35 to 40% in respect to the mobiles. And in respect of the components, the value addition is going to go up to 45 to 50%. And that is the extent of job. Here, the jobs would be more created in the automobile sector, in the food processing sector, in the textile sector. It is the sector where more and more value is being created. So thank you so very much for giving me this opportunity. And with this, I end this presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Ahmed, for such a nice summary of the entire scheme. So I think there are a few questions that I think I and Saral have, and I'm pretty sure there will be other questions that are coming on as well on the chat as we speak. I request all the audience to write their questions in Q&A section. It'll be easy to compile them. At least the first question that I have for you is that you've listed out several sectors where PLI has worked very well in terms of how it was promoting exports and increase the production and all that stuff. And I think I take this point that it is for the new production and not for the existing production. So let me start out the discussion by asking you, I mean, is there any way in which you believe that PLI scheme is all about big players? It does not necessarily support the small enterprises, small and medium enterprises. And second thing is, how do you determine what growth rate is appropriate?
So there are two questions. One is how does it around big players? The second is how I determine the growth rate. They're the two parts of the question. So as regards about big players, yes, it is about the players who have the potential of becoming the global champion. I mentioned during the presentation also, we have chosen scale over spread, but we also believe that in certain sectors, it is necessary to incentivize the smaller of the players also. So that component has also been integrated in certain sectors, in the telecom sector, in the food processing sector, that component also has been integrated. If you have the bigger of the players, he has to create an ecosystem. And it's not the case where bigger of the player will produce everything. He brings the anchor unit, and it is supported by the mid-size and smaller companies also, so that capacities are optimally utilized. That is how you bring efficiencies in the manufacturing process and avoid fragmentation. So that is the first part. As regards the determining the rates, so I mentioned that we had a very, very intensive kind of discussion with the stakeholders. Stakeholders included the ministries, and ministries in turn had detailed discussions with the industry. So we try to work out what is the extent of disability. So be it the cost of the capital, be it the logistics, because in the logistics, we are spending around 14% of GDP, but the world is around 9%. When it comes to the cost of the capital, we spend more. There is the cost of the land involved, the cost of, the commercial electricity is costlier than the domestic electricity. So when it comes to the factors of the production, we are incurring more compared to our competing economies. So that creates the kind of financial disability. If a foreign player has choice of going to any other country and coming to India, he will try to weigh pros and cons. What is the benefit he is going to get in India, and what is the benefit, say, what he is going to get in Vietnam? So if he says that there's a cost disability of around 8 to 10% in India, then why should he come to India? He will definitely go to the Vietnam. So we say we will try to address your cost disability to a certain level, but we also have a huge market which Vietnam doesn't have. We have great geographical location. You can access the European market, this and that. So, and basically we have more and more absorption capacity of the investment than any other country. So this is how we speak to the investors also, try to fairly assess how much is the financial disability. And to that extent, we incentivize. But on one aspect, we are very clear, this intensive will not be for an indefinite period. It has to be for a limited period of time. And in most of the scheme, it's 5 years. It cannot be unlimited. Within that period, they have to achieve efficiencies so that they can sustain themselves. Hope I answered your question.
Oh, absolutely. I was just wondering, right? I mean, when you actually sit down and think about PLI, you were one of the architects who has actually designed this particular scheme. Most of the newspaper articles that I've read about it, most of the popular press has in general been positive. There are some industry commentaries that I've read which have also been fairly, positive with a few changes that they're suggesting. So my question in this regard is, you also talked about several sectors which have gained, and you've even put numbers to what the gain is. But if you were to look at it in retrospect and say that, there are these one or two sectors which could probably have done better with PLI, or, the PLI could have worked even better than it worked in a couple of sectors. What could those be? And could you tell me what the roadblocks are intrinsically to those sectors?
The game has just begun. You can't select the winner. So
no, but I'm asking you to select the ones who are lagging in the lap one of the race.
So not exactly. See, as far as the electronic sector is concerned, that PLI was rolled out first. It has been, and it looks like being great success. Other two PLIs for APIs and that bulk drugs and key starting material, there are also the beneficiaries have been selected. In medical devices, there are also beneficiaries have been selected. And try to understand, it's not like mobile manufacturing. The mobile manufacturing, you have the IP, you have substantial extent of components being imported, you have a very low level of value addition. So and you already have the manufacturing happening in the country, so you can easily scale up and you can start manufacturing very quickly. When it comes to the active pharmaceutical ingredient, whether it is synthesis based or it is a fermentation based, it is going to take couple of years for plant to commercially manufacture the APIs. So the production part of a particular product will vary from industry to industry. So that being the case of the other PLI, remaining of the PLIs, they are rolled out this year. So they are in the process of selecting the beneficiaries. So it's a very, very early to say that who is going to be winner and who is going to be loser, because for us, only winners have been selected. So I don't think any one of them would be loser, because they have been selected based on our assessment. They would be able to deliver. But we have kept this kind of mandate with us. If there is a certain saving in a particular sector and it is not able to fully utilize it, we can divert that saving to another sector which is performing.
Mr. Ahmed, you explained it very well that instead of a large number of sectors, the PLI scheme focuses on certain sectors where you can actually develop scale and gives very aggressive targets in terms of investment there, and also ramp up of capacity there and sales there. The focus is on sales. So with that, do you see that the technology itself would change in the sense that what works for high scale manufacturing may not work for those scale, and because the government is giving the signal that yes, you can bring in more scale, you can invest in larger scale. Certain technologies which are more efficient at larger scale would also come up that would actually increase the cost effectiveness of Indian manufacturing. Do you foresee that?
So definitely, see, whether it is FDI or it is incentive in the form of the PLI. So once you provide the opportunity, the investments come. Investments come for the production. And if you want to achieve efficient production, you need efficient technology also. So if Apple and Samsung and all those kind of mobile manufacturers have come in the country, they have got the technologies also in this country. And if we are trying to achieve greater value addition from existing labor of 15 to 20% to 40%, the component manufacturing is also going to happen in the country. So there has to be increase in the availability of the technology. Similarly, it will happen in other sectors, say automobile sector. We have chosen the sector which is a completely, in automobile sector, the area we have, segment we have chosen is a completely new. This is advanced automotives and electric vehicles. You need technologies and we are going to give incentives. So global players will come, domestic players will utilize, but definitely there would be new technologies which will come in these areas.
There is some kind of a concern, of course, that maybe some of the targets are too steep. I wanted to know, how do you actually come up with a target? How, because it could be seen as too steep or not too steep. How to make it just right?
Or maybe it is just in line with what big ones expect. And
it's not that difficult to make it just right. Make the target steep because the government is going to give money. So we are not going to give easy target. You regret when you achieve easy targets. You don't regret if you fail in higher targets. So that's the philosophy. So we are not going to give any easy targets because government of India is going to implement 5%, 7%. So government of India will ensure that you make enough of investment so that you bring additional production in the country. Target has to be steep enough, and it's not that steep enough. I will be advertising, I would be inviting the application. There will be people who are really coming and committing that they are going to achieve this target. If that is so steep, why people are coming, applying, and committing that they are going to achieve it? Because it is in the achievable range. We are not, it might be steep, but it is not unrealistic. If I don't get any application, then I have to introspect and I will revise also. But so far, whatever targets we have given, we have done it with huge industry consultation. Those have been kept very pragmatic and realistic. We are getting applications, and theoretically speaking, if we don't get applications, there's always flexibility of revising the targets. Ultimately, production must be achieved.
And there are very interesting choices that you made while designing it. For example, you said that ownership does not matter, whether it's a foreign company or a domestic company. I want production to happen in India. Ownership really does not matter. Similarly, where would you sell, whether it is being sold in a export market or domestic market? PLI scheme doesn't seem to make that difference. In a way, do you think that those sectors where there exists a large domestic market, that's where the traction for PLI schemes would be there initially?
So let's go. You can go sector after sector. So you can analyze any sector. You get to the two. I just have two contrasts. One is the electronic sector. There, substantial exports are happening. It's not that there's not domestic market, but the architecture of the scheme is such that substantial exports are happening. Then you have the automobile sector, where you have a lot of emphasis on the electric mobility. And it is something, if I am understand correctly, it is around $5 billion industry as of now. So it is in 5-6 years time is expected to grow around $30 billion domestic industry. So when it comes to the electric vehicles, a lot of consumption might happen in the country. On the other hand, you take the textile sector. Because we have chosen those tariff lines, man-made fiber, man-made fabric, and technical textile. So two of MMF lines, they will largely go to the exports because that is where we have a great opportunity. So it plays differently in different sectors. And as far as the manufacturer beneficiary is concerned, he is happy as long as he is able to sell, whether it's a domestic market or in the export market. As a policymaker, the government, I am happy as long as he is able to produce it.
As we explained that there was a scheme MEIS earlier which had to be shut down because of WTO requirements, and the PLI scheme has been successful in terms of making sure that those kind of concerns are not there. So in terms of the policy making of government of India, what do you think are some of the learnings from the PLI scheme itself in terms of making the policy for the PLI scheme, that you think we can learn in terms of policy making in itself? Are there learnings that are to be taken?
I would like to make only one statement because I don't want to undermine that statement. The PLI scheme is a scheme which gives incentive only after the performance. That's the one statement I would like to make. It will give incentive only you have achieved the target. You have actually manufactured it, sold it, audited it, only then I will give money. So it ensures success. It eliminates pilferage. So that is the key of the PLI scheme. I can talk about many of the things that it is more banking on the scale rather than spread, so that we are choosing the areas of core competency, areas of technology, areas where the future of the country growth lies. Those are very, very important aspects. But the most important aspect I would like to say is that it will give incentive only after the targets have been achieved. And we are fixing the targets which are steep. We know we are going to achieve 500 billion of targets. So for that thing, we have to select sectors after sectors, to what extent they can achieve. That is how we have to fix the target, so that we can actually achieve $500 billion by the end of the scheme.
I had a quick question. So you're saying essentially that as the production keeps increasing and it crosses certain thresholds and the firms achieve targets, you're going to give them the benefit of this particular scheme so that they can become more export competitive, they can become global champions. So the question that I have is that, given the 2-year experience, given the last few years experience that you've had with PLI, what do you think is next for it? I mean, how is the PLI evolving further? What's PLI 2.0, if I may ask you that question, that you envisage happening in your thought process?
Too speculative, and
yeah, I understand that, but
maybe it's a very valid question asked to the wrong person.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think this is IIMA, so therefore a bit of out of syllabus questions, I think, is how I was thinking about it. But anyway, so let me ask you a slightly different question. Where do you think you need support from the government of India? What are the other reforms which you think could happen in parallel with PLI so that the scheme becomes even more powerful?
Yeah. That's very important question you have asked. That's very important question. It's not everything can be central government driven. Everything cannot be only on the policy and paper. See, so something has to change on the ground. That is why every state has to participate. So we in NITI Aayog also, we do evaluation of each and every state on a different set of parameters. So I give you one index which my vertical only releases is export preparedness index, where we say we will evaluate states on 4 broad parameters. That is the policy. Second is the business ecosystem. Third is export ecosystem, and fourth is export performance. And these have number of indicators, together around 56 indicators. So we try to evaluate each and every state on those very different indicators on a scale of binary or 100 to 1 to 100. We evaluate each and every state. That is how we create action points for different states. So these are the areas you need to work at, because what is presently happening, around 5 of the states of the country are making most of the India's exports. So export story has to be a state-led story, where every state has to participate. So that gets very, very important. Honorable Prime Minister launched one district, one product. It's not confined to those very states who are performing in the export. It has to travel in the mainland, in the remote areas. We have to develop export hubs so that they also participate in the exports. So we have to get into the macro level, create the reforms, create the institutions which can help the businesses in their business as well as achieving exports. So there are other things. You need to develop critical infrastructure. There is one national industrial corridor which is developing townships, which provides plug and play model to various industries. But entire country is not covered. Now the Gati Shakti has been launched. Number of infrastructure projects will come under the Gati Shakti, and the projects of different ministries, different states, and this National Industrial Corridor Development Corporation, they would be all synergized. So once we improve on logistics, we are going to straightway achieve the efficiency of around 3 to 4%. So that's very, very important. So states need to work on their disabilities, because these kind of incentives cannot be sustained forever by the government of India. We have made it very clear it is for a period of 5 years, maybe in some schemes for 7 years. Within that period, industry has to achieve efficiency, states have to work, and they are working in improving their ease of doing business, their export ecosystem, so that they can invite more and more investment in the country. That is how you can transform manufacturing landscape of the country. Ultimately, your surplus labor, which is coming out of the agriculture sector, has to absorb in the job giving areas, which will come only largely in the manufacturing sector. So that is very, very important. It's a participation of the private sector, participation of the state government, as well as the participation of the central government. And that has to be done.
Okay. So I have one interesting question from the audience. I think it is from Dr. Ujjwal Vaishnav. So let me quickly ask that question. For advanced materials, most materials are used in multiple applications, could be electronics, ACC, medical, etc. So how do we incentivize these across application segments for PLI?
So the question is basically the intermediates which are going into the manufacturing of high technology products. It's a question.
Yes, that will be the question. Yeah.
So there are a few sectors that question gets very, very important. So for the ACC battery, number of components will be imported in initial year, but we are saying within a 5-year period, you make 60% of the value addition in the country. So we are giving them sufficient incentive to establish their factories in India, and within 5 years' time, they should achieve 60% of the value addition. For solar PV, we are saying to bring completely integrated plant in the country. For specialty steel, we are saying the complete integrated plant should be in India. But we know the practical difficulties. That is why in the ACC battery, we should never say to bring it from the day one. You see, in electronics presently, we are around 15% of the value addition. We expect it to raise to 40% in a 5-year time, but it has not been mandated in the policy. So, because we are incentivizing the disability which is being caused for manufacturing in the country, we expect they will manufacture here. And in most of the PLI schemes, we have mandated value addition in the country. So if you are going to avail PLI incentive, there's a compulsion to make value addition in the country. So that is how more and more these high technology components will also be manufactured in India.
Mr. Ahmed, as much as I think one would love to ask you more questions and participate in the further discussion, I think we're fairly close to the end of the 1 hour time that we had sought from you.
There was time to come in here, sir.
Sorry?
I don't have time to.
Yeah. So anyway, so given this Friday night also, so I would like to take this opportunity once again to thank you very sincerely for talking to us. There are a few things that I'm taking away from this conversation in terms of how the first statement you made, and I really like it. It is that PLI gives incentive only after performance. So to me, that's a great policy direction that one is talking about in this particular case. I mean, incentives come before because you performed and not otherwise. And the second one that I'm actually looking at is depth as against spread. That's another interesting thing. So allow me to quickly thank you sincerely for this wonderful talk today. For the researchers amongst you, maybe I can ask one question saying, how can researchers help you with the PLI scheme? And maybe I'll then request Saral to close this out. How can academics, how can PhD students get involved?
Then, in fact, that's very encouraging offer coming from IIMA Ahmedabad. In fact, when we designed PLI scheme, we had to slog for around 5-6 months to design it. And no matter how much effort you put in, you cannot say the product is perfect. So we need to continuously work on, innovate and improve on it. And we will, in fact, welcome if IIM can associate with us in further improving, because the PLI scheme, the way the architecture of the PLI scheme is that it's not frozen in time. It has been kept dynamic, because whatever the guidelines, whatever the rates, whatever the amount, they can undergo change during the implementation itself. That is the mandate we have got, because we cannot visualize how things will change in 5-6 years time. So in that case, the collaboration with the researchers, especially the institutions like IIMs, becomes very encouraging and important for us. So we, in fact, look forward for a more engaged cooperation with that organization. And I'm immensely thankful for having given me opportunity to come here. And I think it was of some use to you and the audience.
It was Mr. Ahmed. It was Mr. Ahmed, and it is. We must express thanks to you and NITI Aayog for having this discussion and telling us, for example, as Professor Pingali said, what is the crux of PLI scheme in terms of the fact that it is output based, it is quantifiable, it is measurable. And those are some of the kind of ways in which a policy direction, could be discerned, from the PLI scheme, which is very interesting. And for us, it was a very enlightening discussion that you, shared with us. So thank you for joining us in this conversation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
I'll just add one small point.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Ahmed has been the student at IIM Ahmedabad at some point in time where he attended a few classes on training for IRS. And so therefore,
I still remember case studies of Mr. Saral Mukherjee. Those are very interesting.
I would actually say this, while this should have been my opening statement, I would make it my closing statement. Welcome back, actually, to the.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.